All right, the last time when we gathered here, we were actually reading Joshua chapter 10, and we were discussing about the story of Gibeons. So I don't know if you remember some of the things that I actually discussed with you regarding the Gibeons. So just to go over the story once again, the things that we have shared last time. So Joshua was given a task by God and Moses. When you enter into the promised lands, you have to get rid of everyone, all inhabitants of that land. Joshua needs to drive them out. And Gibeon was one of the decent city. It was a big city actually, and the people are very strong. Many of the people think that they are very small and they are weak, but in contrary, they're not small. They're not weak. These people are very strong people, brave and a warrior, and the city was big. Even though they were strong and big, they realized this war is not about them, it's not about Israel. They realized that as long as the God is with them, there's no way. It doesn't really matter how strong they are. It does not really matter how big they are. They knew this battle is not going to actually to win. So what they did was they sort of like tricked the Israelites and Joshua. They actually, living the very next town, but when they actually brought the spies and they brought the bags with the foods and their clothes and sandals, and as if they actually came from very far end. So they lied to Joshua and saying like, we came from very far end and we wanted to make the treaty with you. And because they saw, they actually, they looked like they came from a long way because of their food was rotten and their clothes were worn out. So they thought, Joshua thought, and the Israelites thought that they were actually, came from the far end. But then later on, after they made a treaty with them, they realized that they were like the people who were living right next town. So they were so surprised. It's like, why did you guys lie to us? I said, well, because we want to live. And then there's a people who are actually gathered there, and there are other kings in that regions. They actually made allied. There are about 5 kings, gathered together, and said, you know what? They actually turned. They betrayed us. So you know what? Let's gather. Let's just unite it together, and then just attack Gibeons and get rid of them, because they were upset. They were supposed to actually kind of like working with the other inhabitants and then fight against Israel instead of giving up on them. So when they gather, so Gibeon actually reported back to the Joshua and say, hey, we made a treaty with you, so help us and save us. And then Gibeon is the one who actually went out. Because we made a treaty with you, then we're going to help you. We're going to fight for you. So Joshua brought all these people, and then they fought against those allied who were gathered to destroy the Gibeon. So I gave you the whole story of the Gibeons, what that story is about. So many of the people think that, Gibeon was, they lied to him. Joshua did not really, inquire of God whether they should just make the treaty with them or not. He just went ahead and made a treaty with them. And there was a mistake. Of course it was a mistake. But at the same time, there's no mention in the Bible saying that God saying, why did you do that? God never said that in the Bible. So it has a different, meanings of this why Joshua made a treaty with Gibeon. And I was explaining to you about the story of the Gibeon and said, whoever wants to live, as long as they come to Joshua, which is Jesus, even though they're supposed to be removed, even though they're supposed to be destroyed, God is gracious, and He actually, made them to live. And I actually gave the story, and it's kind of mapping the story of the book of John. There is one adulterous woman who were caught in the middle of the scene, and then when she was brought out, and everyone around there, they about to stone her, and they asked Jesus, what should we do about this lady? Should we stone her? So they were testing Jesus, right? And then Jesus said, well, okay, whoever does not have a sin, stone her. And then they realized that they themselves is a sinner. So they all left their stones, and then they just disappear. So as I was explaining to you before, because she was brought out to Jesus, because there is a law. Without the law, there's no reason for her to be dragged out before Jesus. But because there is a law, she was dragged out to Jesus. But because she was brought out to Jesus, she's supposed to be stoned by the people. But because she was brought out to Jesus, and she was able to spare her life, right? Same story. It's exactly same exact story. So Gibeon wanted to live, and whoever comes to Jesus who wants to live, they will be saved. Like us, we don't want to die. I don't want to die. You don't want to die. That's why you came to Jesus, and Jesus is the one who will save you, and He will forgive you for your sins. So that's the story of the Gibeon. So let's dig in little more than that. Okay, so as I mentioned, Gibeon was saved by Joshua. And not just Joshua saved them, not just actually destroy the other allied, but what Joshua did was literally, he stopped the sun. I mean, that's not separating like Red Sea. Compared to like stopping the sun, splitting the Red Sea is like a joke. That's nothing. Right? If you can stop the sun, it's like, it's just, there are only few times in the entire Bible that actually this kind of thing happened. It only twice in the entire Bible. Right? And then one of them is like this. And the other one is not as significant as this one. Right? God stopped the sun for this Gibeon who's supposed to be dead. So that shows how much God cares for this Gibeon. Right? So let's take a look at so let's take a look at a little more of this the Gibeons. So let's take a look at this particular people, and so God saved them, and God definitely helped them to survive, right? So then, what happened to this people after this, incidents? What happened to them? Do you know any story about the Gibeons after this incident in Joshua? Well, it doesn't really ring a bell, right? Then we're going to take a look. So let's move to 2 Samuel chapter 21. 2 Samuel chapter 21. So we're going to read Now there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year. And David sought the face of the Lord, and the Lord said, There is a blood guilt on Saul and on his house, because he put the Gibeonites to death. So the king called the Gibeonites and spoke to him. Now the Gibeonites were not of the people of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites. Although the people of Israel had sworn to spare them, Saul had sought to strike them down in his zeal for the people of Israel and Judah. And David said to the Gibeonites, What shall I do for you? And how should I make atonement that you may bless the the heritage of the Lord? The Gibeonites said to them, It is a matter of a silver or gold between us and Saul or his house. Neither is it for us to put any man to death in Israel. And he said, What do you say that I shall do for you? They said to the king, The man who consumed us and the plan to destroy us, so that we should have no place in all the territory of Israel. Let 7 of his sons to give unto us, so that we may hang them before the Lord at Gibeah of Saul, the chosen of the Lord. And the king said, I will give them. But the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Saul's sons, Jonathan, because of the oath of the Lord that was between them, between David, Jonathan, the son of Saul. The king took the 2 sons and Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, whom she bore to Saul, Armoni, and Mephibosheth, and the 5 sons of Merab, the daughter of Saul, whom she bore Adriel, the son of Barzillai, and Meholathi, and he gave them into the hands of the Gibeonites, and they hanged them on the mountain before the Lord. And the 7 of them perished together. They were put to death in the first day of the harvest, at the beginning of our barley harvest. Then Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, took sackcloth and spread it for herself on the rock from the beginning of the harvest until the rain fall upon them from the heavens. And she did not allow the birds of the air to come upon them by day, or the beasts of the field by night. When David was told that Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, the concubine of Saul, had done, David went and took the bones of Saul's and the bones of his sons Jonathan from the men of Jabesh Gilead, who had stolen them from the public square of Bethshan, where the Philistines had hanged them on the days of Philistine killed Saul's in Gilboa, and brought up from there the bones of Saul's and the bones of his son Jonathan, and they gathered the bones of those who were hanged, and they buried the bones of Saul's and his son Jonathan in the land of Benjamin in Zelah, in the tomb of the Kish of his father. And they did all that kings commanded, and after that God responded to the plea for the land. So what happened was, during the time of the reign of David, the King David, there was 3 years of famines. It's not only 3 years of famines during the time of Elijah, but there was another 3 years of famine during the time of King David. And because rain did not come down, so David did not know what's going on. So he actually seeked the Lord and finding out why there is a famine in the land. So he inquired of the Lord and said, Lord, what is it? It is actually, that you're not actually giving us a rain. And then God responded to him, and it said, because of some things that you have done. What did we do wrong? Well, because of what Saul did, it actually, because of that, there's no rain. So they went out to the Gibeonites, and it says, like, what should we do? And the Gibeonites said, give us Saul's 7 sons, and all the sons, and give it to us. It's not the matter of a silver and gold. It has nothing to do with the food. It's nothing to do with the treasure. It's about what Saul did to us. Because when Joshua made a treaty with Gibeonites, they promised they're going to protect them. They're not going to harm them. So the promise that Joshua made, the Israelites or the Judeans should never touch the Gibeonites because of the promise that Joshua made. But Saul had his own zeal that for himself thought, well, we need to get rid of the Gibeonites because they're not Israelites, right? They're inhabitants of Canaanites. We need to get rid of them. So they actually trying to remove the Gibeonites from their land where they're living. And then God did not like that. So most likely those are 7 sons who were probably involved with Saul to kill those Gibeonites. That's why the Gibeonites was asking for those 7 sons of Saul. So Gibeonite said, give us those Saul's sons. And then King David said, okay, we'll give it to you. And then he gave all the sons to Gibeonites except Mephibosheth, because he made the promise with Jonathan that he will protect his descendants. So except Jonathan's sons, he gave every Saul's sons. And what they did was they hung them. They killed them and hung them. Once they actually killed and hung them, and then famine stopped and the rain started to come back. So when you look at this story, remember, from the time of King David, how long ago was that Joshua made a promise to Gibeonites? How long had been passed? It's about 450 years. It was about 450 years ago, or more. Close like 500 years that had passed. I mean, that's a long time ago. Right? 500 years ago is a long time ago. Who cares about the promise that someone made with Gibeonites? Forget it. That was like a long time ago. But from God's point of view, from the descendants of the Gibeonites' perspective, that promise that Joshua made is still valid. He should never violated that. God remembered, and even though Joshua made that treaty with the Gibeonites, God remembered that promise that Joshua made. You should never touch Gibeonite. And he judged the Sauls and his sons for what they did to try to get rid of the Gibeonites. God fully respected all the promise that Joshua made with the Gibeonites. This is an amazing story. When you think about it, who is the Gibeonites? Oh, they're nobody, right? From the Israelites' perspective, as long as they're not Israelite and Judeans, they don't care. They don't care about anyone else. They only care about the chosen people, which is the Israelites and the Judeans. That's all they care about. Everyone else, they don't care. But God cares for these Gibeonites. Even though the Israelites did not care, God did care. So that's how much he cared for this pagan Gentiles. These Gibeonites are not the chosen people, but because they want to live, because they came to Joshua, because they came to Jesus, they want to live. God promised, I will protect you. I will give my word that you will be my people. And that's not the end of it. That's not the end of it. Let's take a look at Second Chronicle. Second Chronicle. Chapter 1. Second Chronicle chapter 1. We're going to read from verse 1. Solomon, the son of David, established himself in his kingdom, and the Lord his God was with him, and made him exceedingly great. Solomon spoke to all Israel, to the commanders of thousands and of hundreds, to the judges, and to all the leaders in all Israel, the heads of father's house. And Solomon and all the assembly with him went to the high place that was at Gibeons, for the tent of meeting of God, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, had made in the wilderness, was there. What was there? What was there? Where? What's there? God's tabernacle is where? In Gibeon. What? God's tabernacle is in Gibeon? Why is it there? You have to realize the God's tabernacle is in Gibeon. You see, this, for you, when you read something like this, I say, yeah, whatever, Gibeon, okay, who cares? But it is something that you have to pay attention, because this is all promise that God made with Joshua. Right? As I mentioned, this Joshua is represent Jesus. And the promise that he made with Gentiles, I will never forget you. I will never go against the promise that I made with you. I will protect you. I will be with you. As if this Gibeonites being treated as the chosen people. And the tabernacle is in Gibeon. Why is it in Gibeon? Because from God's perspective, God treated the Gibeon as just like one of his people. This is like amazing story. And then when you actually look at the verse 13 on the same chapter, it says, So Solomon came from the high place at Gibeons, from before the tent of meeting, to Jerusalem, and he reigned over Israel. So right before the tabernacle moved from Gibeons over to Jerusalem, this tabernacle was in Gibeon, which is a big thing. So let's take a look at some other places. Let's see. This time we're gonna go to 1 second. Let's take a look at the First Chronicle this time. First Chronicle. First Chronicle, chapter 12. First Chronicle, chapter 12. We're going to read from verse 1. Now these are the men who came to David at Ziklag, while he could not move about freely because of Saul the son of Achish, and they were among the mighty men who helped them in war. They were bowmen and could shoot arrow and sling stones with either the right or the left hand. They were Benjamites and Saul's kinsmen. The chief was Ahizel, then Joash, both the son of Shema of Gibeah. Also Jeziel and Pelet, and sons of Asmaveth, and Barakah, and Jehu of Anatoth, Ishmaiah of Gibeon, a mighty man among the 30, and a leader over the 30. So, this is a mighty man of King David. And out of the many of David's mighty men, there are Gibeonites in there. Right? So, it is David's men. It's like one of the inner circles and in one of the oval member, the mighty man who's actually fighting against, the enemies of King David. And among those people who David trusted and rely on to fight for him, and there are Gibeonites in there. Which is an amazing story. Because Gibeonites are not Israelites. But he was one of the key men of King David. So as you can see here, now the Gibeonites are like part of the Israel. They're being treated that way. They're actually playing very, very important roles with King David. And as I mentioned, the tabernacle was in Gibeons. So Gibeons are taking very, very important roles with the Israelites. And that's not the end. So let's turn to Nehemiah. Nehemiah. We're going to read from chapter 3. Nehemiah chapter 3. We're going to read from verse 1. Then Eliashib, the high priest, arose up with his brothers, the priests, and they built the sheep gate. They consecrated it and set its door. They consecrated as far as the tower of 100, as far as the tower of Hanael. And next to him the man of Jericho built. The next to them Zachar, the son of Imri, built. The sons of Hasenah built the fish gate. They laid its beam and sets its door, its bolts, and its bars. And next to him Meremoth, the son of Uriah, the son of Hazak, repaired. And next to them Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, the son of Meshezabel, the repaired, and next to them Zadok, the son of Bana, repaired, and next to them the Tekoit repaired, and there nobles would not stoop to serve their Lord. Joiada, the son of Paseah, the Meshullam, the son of Besodeiah, to repair the gate of Yeshhanah. They laid its beam and it set its door, its bolt, and its bar. The next to them repaired Melatiah, the Gibeonites, and Jadon, the Meronotith, the men of Gibeon, and the Mizpah, the seat of the governor of the province beyond the river. So what the story is, what happened was, after the Israelites were returned from Babylon, because Persians released the captives from Babylon after they actually destroyed the Babylon Empire. So they let the Israelites go back to their land where they came from. So when they came back, they built the temple. It's the second temple after the first temple, which was Solomon's temple, was destroyed. They, came back to Jerusalem, and they realized that, their old Solomon's the temple has been destroyed. So they rebuilt the temple again. It's not compared to what it was before, but they built a small one. And then after they built it, because of the Gentiles around that, the Israelites, they came and destroyed the gates of that temple. So Nehemiah, later on, he came to Jerusalem to repair those gates that were destroyed by the Gentiles. While he was actually repairing those gates that were destroyed, and the people who rebuilt those temple gates, as you can see here, the Gibeonites were there to repair the God's temple. And going back to what I said before, who are these people? They're not even Israelites. Who cares about the God's temple? Why would the Gentiles will build the God's temple? But, as I mentioned, Gibeonites were involved to rebuild the temples. And when is this time? This is after things were destroyed by the Gentiles. And they're the one who are part of those people who are repairing the God's temple. So, when is this? From the time that Joshua made the promise, right? It's almost more than thousands of years has gone by. More than 1,000 years had gone by, and they're still involved. And their name's still coming up. Why? Because of the promise that God made. Because of the promise that Joshua made with the Gibeonites. You are being treated just like Israelite people. Just like the chosen people. Who are we? We're nobody. But because He made the promise with us, through the faith that we have, when you think about this, I want you to think about this for a second. All the promise that we see in this Old Testament that you read, God made a promise and God made a covenant. Who did He make that covenant with? Who did God make a covenant with? It's very simple. God made a covenant with Abraham and his descendants. All the promise, all the covenants in the Bible was made with Abraham and his descendants. God never made the promise with us. God never made a covenant with Gentiles. It's only Abraham and his descendants. Then I'm going to ask you questions. Why do you believe the covenant and the promise God made is applicable to you? Yeah? Is it true? How about someone, anyone else? Because of Jesus. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, ultimately, that's the answer. But there's more to it. All right, let's turn to Galatians. Galatians chapter 3. We're going to read from verse 1. O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? It was before your eyes that Jesus Christ was publicly portrayed as crucified. Let me ask you only this. Did you receive the Spirit by works of the law or by hearing with faith? Are you so foolish? Having begun by the Spirit, are you now being perfected by the flesh? Did you suffer so many things in vain, if indeed it was in vain? Does he who supplies the Spirit to you and works miracles among you do so by works of the law or by hearing with faith? Just as Abraham believed God and it was accounted to him as righteousness? Know then that it is those of faith who are the sons of Abraham, and the Scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentile by faith, preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, In you shall all the nations be blessed. So then, those who are of faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith. You see that? It is promise was made with Abraham and descendants, and we are not Jewish. We're not Israelites. However, whoever believed in Jesus, because of the faith, we are counted not as a physical descendants, but spiritual descendants of Abraham. So the covenant and the promise that was made to Abraham and his descendants is also applicable to us because we are treated as the Abraham's descendants. Not through the bloodline of Abraham, but through the spiritual descendants of Abraham. Do you understand? Well, obviously the answer is here. We just didn't know where the answer was. Yeah. So, we're living as the chosen people, and we are treated as Abraham's descendants, although our blood has nothing to do with Abraham. And on the other hand, even though they're, Israelites and descendants of actual Abraham's bloodline, if they don't have faith, obviously, there is nothing to do with it. So, Gibeonite is also the same thing. Although they got nothing to do with Israelites, they got nothing to do with the Judeans, but because of they want to live, because they trusted, they actually wanted to, come to Joshua. Their life has been spared, and their descendants also blessed, just like anyone else. They were kind of like us. So that the examples of the Gibeonites, it is example for us. They pretty much being part of the importance of the God's history. So as you can see here, God is showing as an example through the Gibeonites, and see how much God cares, even though they're not Israelites. So this is something that we need to actually learn as a lesson. All right, so let's come back to Joshua chapter 10. So last time we actually finished up to verse 15 from chapter 10. So we're going to continue on starting from verse 16. These 5 kings fled and hid themselves in the cave of Makkedah, and it was told to Joshua, the 5 kings have been found hidden in the cave of Makkedah. And Joshua said, roll large stones against the mount of the cave, and set men by it to guard them, but do not stay there yourselves. Pursue your enemies, attack their rear guard, do not let them enter their cities, for the Lord your God has given them into your hand. When Joshua and the sons of Israel had finished striking them with a great blow until they were wiped out, and when the remnant was remained of them had entered into the fortified city, then all the people returned safe to Joshua in the camp of Makkedah. Not a man moved his tongue against any of the people of Israel. Then Joshua said, open the mouth of the cave and bring those 5 kings out to me from the cave. And they did so, and brought those 5 kings out to him from the cave. The kings of Jerusalem, the kings of Hebron, the kings of Jarmuth, the kings of Lachish, and the kings of Eglon. And when they brought these kings out to Joshua, Joshua summoned all the men of Israel, and said to the chief of men of war who had gone with them, come near, put your feet on the necks of their kings. Then they came near and put their feet on their necks. And Joshua said to them, do not be afraid or dismayed. Be strong and courageous, for though the Lord will do to all your enemies against whom you fight. And afterward Joshua struck them and put them to death, and he hanged them on 5 trees. And they hung on the trees until evening. But the time of the going down of the sun Joshua commanded, and they took them down from the trees and threw them into the cave where they had hidden themselves. And they set large stone against the mouth of the cave, which remained in this very day. As for Makkedah, the Joshua captured it on that day and struck it and its kings with the edge of the sword. He devoted the destruction of every person in it. He left none remaining, and he hid to the kings of Makkedah, just as he had done to the kings of Jericho. So, although there are 5 kings were, together fight against Joshua and the Israelites, they could not prevail. Why? because it doesn't matter how strong they are. It does not matter how brave they are. It does not matter what kind of strategy they had. It's nothing to do with it, because God gave them to the hands of Joshua. So the war is nothing to do with their powers and their strategy. It is totally up to God's. So from our perspective, we always we measured it and say like, well, let's figure it out. Let's just count the number of the people over there, and let's just have the strategies to make sure that we can win this, the battle. From God's point of view, no matter what you do, it doesn't really matter. As long as God is with you, you're winning the game. If God is not with you, well, good luck with that. So, it is God who actually controls the war. Verse 29, Then Joshua and all Israel with him passed on from Makkedah to Libnah, and fought against Libnah. And the Lord gave also and its kings into the hands of Israel. And he struck it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it he left none remaining in it. And he did it to its king, as he had done to the kings of Jericho. Then Joshua and all Israel with him passed on from Libnah and to Lachish, and laid siege to it, and fought against it. And the Lord gave Lachish into the hand of Israel, and he captured it on the second day, and struck it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it, as he had done to Libnah. Then Horam, king of Jazer, came up to help Lachish, and Joshua struck them and his people until he left none remaining. Then Joshua and all Israel with him passed on from Lachish to Eglon, and they laid siege to it and fought against it, and they captured it on that day, and struck it with the edge of the sword, and he devoted every person in it to destructions that day, as he had done to Lachish. Then Joshua and all Israel with him went up from Eglon to Hebron, and they fought against it, and captured it and struck it with the edge of the sword, and the kings and its towns, and every person in it he left none remaining, as he had done to Eglon, and devoted to destructions and every person in it. Then Joshua and all Israel with them turned back to Debir, and fought against it, and he captured it with its king and all its town, and they struck them with the edge of the sword, and devoted to destructions every person in it. He left none remaining, just as he had done to Hebron and Libnah and its kings. So he did to Debir and to its king. So Joshua struck the whole land, the hill country, and Negeb, and the lowland, and the slopes, and all their kings. He left none remaining, but devoted to destructions all that beneath, just as the Lord God of Israel commanded. And Joshua struck them from Kadesh Barnea as far as Gaza, and all the country of Goshen, and as far as the Gibeons. And Joshua captured all these kings and their land at one time, because the Lord God of Israel fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned, and all Israel with them, to the camp at Gilgal. So, all the war that Joshua fought against. So, there's no mentions of how strong they were, how smart they were, what their strategies were. There's nothing mentioned. So what is it actually really mentioned in the Bible? There are a few things that are mentioned in the Bible. God turned them to the hand of Israel. Right? God turned each countries and gave it to Joshua. That's how Joshua and Israel won the battle. And then Joshua removed them all as God commanded. So what's really important? God is in control. You trust what God said. You do what God said. That's the bottom line. Do the way God told you to do. Do not deviate from it. Whatever God commanded you, you just do it. That's what they learned in the wilderness. When they're wandering during those the wilderness, the first generation of the people who came out of Egypt, what were they saying? Why did God brought us out of the Egypt and kill us here? So they had a different opinions, right? They thought God was not fair. God brought them out of Egypt where they were living well, and then they were killing in a wilderness. Was that the God's plan? No, that was not the God's plan. God's plan was basically give the land, the promised land, to the Israelites and pull them out of Egypt. They were thinking God was not fair. They did not trust the Lord. They had their own ideas how gods were doing, because they did not trust the Lord. But the second generation, after they saw the first generation was totally wiped out, only second generations had seen one thing. What was that? When the pillar of a cloud and when the pillar of fire moves, you move. When it stopped, you stop. You don't think. You don't plan. Whenever God moves, you move. Whenever God stops, you stop. That's what they learned in the wilderness. You do what God told you to do. Don't deviate from it. Don't think about it. Just do what God said. And as I told you before. So then how do we know what God said? Exactly. What is written in the Bible is what God said. If you don't know the Bible, and obviously you don't know what God said, since you don't know what God said, guess what? You can't do what God said because you have no idea what God said. So if you don't know, you will do what you think it's right. Right? You will do what you think it's right. That's exactly what the people of, the Judge did. So let's turn to Book of Judge. So last chapter, which is chapter 21, last verse, which is verse 25. And let's see what he said. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So what does that mean? Everyone did what they think it's right. But you know what? This is something what Moses said. Let's take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 12. Deuteronomy chapter 12, 8. I'm sure that particular verse is already have a red line. Yeah. So let's read. You shall not do according to all that we are doing here today, everyone doing whatever is right in his own eyes. Don't do it that way. Don't do it the way you think it's right. Then what does that mean? Do what God said. do what God said instead of do what you think it's right. Because most likely what you think it's right is wrong. So we have to learn. One thing I'll teach you, there's something that you have to keep in mind. It's a very, very important. Remember this. You have to believe God is good. God is faithful and God is good. Whatever He does in your life, you have to trust. God prepares what is best for you. If you lose that faith, you will struggle. Sometimes God will put you through difficulties. Sometimes you're going to put into very bad situations. Sometimes you may think, God, what are you doing to me? Why are you doing all this to me? What did I do wrong, Lord? You may put in that situations. You may not understand why God is doing what He's doing. You just don't understand. But after time goes by, later on, you will learn. God did what He did to protect you. What God did because He cared. Because He prepared a best way for you. That's why He put you to go through that path. You have to trust Him that God is good and God is faithful. God always give you what is best for you. God never give you the bad things. So this is something that you have to keep in mind. If you hold on to it, you will see. That's what you're learning through this Bible. God will always provide the things that is what is best for you. This is why you trust Him and do the things that what God told you to do. All right. Chapter 11. Yeah? Yeah. Correct. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Yes, that's correct. You're getting better at it. You're paying attention to like numbers now. Yes. Yes, you did. Correct. Correct. Good. Good. That's good. As a matter of fact, actually, I skipped one thing. Actually, I skipped one thing that about the Gibeons. That's something I forgot. Let's just take a look at Joshua chapter 9 for a second. Joshua chapter 9. We're going to read verse 20 and 21. This we will do to them, let them live, lest wrath be upon us because of the oath that we sworn to them. And the leaders said to them, let them leave. So they became cutters of wood and drawers of water for all the congregations, just as the leaders had said to them. Verse 23. Now therefore you are cursed, and some of you shall never be anything but servant, cutters of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God. Verse 27. But Joshua made them that they cutters of wood and drawers of water for the congregations, for the altars of the Lord, to this day in place that he should choose. There's certain patterns that you see here in this verse. What do you see here? Right, the Gibeonites became the people who do what? Cutters of wood and drawers of the waters. Right? Okay, so it in this particular chapter 9, for those Gibeonites, it actually mentioned 3 times that they became the cutters of wood and the drawers of the waters. What does that really mean, the cutters of wood and the drawers of water? Let's take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 29. Deuteronomy chapter 29. We're going to read from verse 10. You are standing today, all of you, before the Lord your God, the heads of your tribes, your elders and your officers, and all the men of Israel, your little ones, your wives, and the sojourners who is in your camp, from the one who chops your wood to the one who draws your waters, so that you may enter into the sworn covenant of the Lord your God, which the Lord your God is making with you today, that he may establish you today and his people, and that he may be your God as he promised you, and as he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, to the Jacob. What does it say? So this was even before Joshua actually spared the people of Gibeon. Right? And there was a mention, the people who are actually cutting the woods and draws the waters will be included in the covenant. And it's good that you're actually thinking there is a 5 kings. Good. Chapter 11. When Jabin, the king of Hazor, heard of this, he sent to Jobab, king of Madon, and to the king of Shimron, and the king of Ashaph, and to the kings who were in the northern hill country, and Arabah, the south of Chinneroth, and in the lowland, and Naphoth Dor on the west. So Canaanites in the east and the west, the Amorites, the Hittites, and Perizzites, and Jebusites in the hill country, and the Hivites under Hermon in the land of Mizpah. And they came out with all their troops, the great horde, in numbers like the sand that is on the seashore, with very many horses and chariots. And all these kings joined their forces and came and encamped together at the water of Merom to fight against Israel. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them, for tomorrow at this time I will give over all of them slain to Israel. You shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire." So Joshua and all his warriors came suddenly against them by the water of Merom and fell upon them. And the Lord gave them into the hand of Israel, who struck them and chased them as far as the great Sidon and Misrephoth Maim, and eastward as far as the valley of Mizpah. And they struck them until he left none remaining. And Joshua did to them just as the Lord said to him. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots with fire. And Joshua turned back at the time that captured Hazor, the strucken kings with the sword. And Hazor formerly was the head of all those kingdoms. And they struck them with the sword, all who were in it, devoting them to destructions. There was none left that breath, and he burned Hazor with fire. And all the cities of those kings and all their kings Joshua captured and struck them with the edge of the sword, and devoting them to destructions, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. But none of the cities that stood on the mounds did Israel burn, except the Hazor alone, and Joshua burned. And all the spoils of these cities and the livestock and the people of Israel took for their plunder. But every person they struck with the edge of the sword until they had destroyed them. And they did not leave any who breathed, just as the Lord had commanded Moses his servant. So Moses had commanded Joshua, so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. So, when you look at verse 15, what does he say here? Just as the Lord had commanded Moses, his servant. So Moses had commanded Joshua. So the Joshua did. Moses had commanded. He left nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. So, what Joshua did is nothing out of his own mind, but he only did what God told Moses to do and what Moses told Joshua to do. So he did not deviate from the Lord's command. This is the emphasis that I made it several times when we were going through the Pentateuch. When you read the book of Numbers, book of Deuteronomy, they kept mentioning Moses did what God told him to do, what God commanded it to him. Right? Remember that? Same exact thing. What's really important is do not bring things from other places and trying to just, a conflict with what God commanded. In today's world, and especially in today's church, what we do, we bring ideas from this world. We adopt things from this world. We apply. We actually do the same thing what this world was doing. Instead of what God told us to do and follow what God told us to do, we actually bring more ideas from outside to church because we think that's right. That's how the world is doing. So we should do the same thing. That should be opposite. We don't really care what other people do. We don't really care what the world is doing. We care about what God told us to do. That's the focus, is in the Bible. Remember I mentioned, several times, I gave you as an example. How do we structure our worship service in church? Right? We have our child group. We have the youth group. We have a young adults group. We have, the rest of the people group. We have a separate services by age. Right? Who told us to do that? Exactly. We did. Why? Because that's what we do at school. That's how the school system works. That's how we grew up. Right? And then we actually took that idea. We thought wow, you know what? That's a great idea. This is how we should educate our kids. This is how we should actually, have our worship service. We adapt those ideas from this world and brought to church. And we're doing things the way outside of the church is doing. And we think this is the best idea. But that's not what God told us to do. When Moses gathered people, how did he structure the people together and listen to? Exactly. That's what Moses did. How about Jesus? When Jesus brought all these people, of 5,000 people, he did not say, oh, you know what? Hey, actually group the kids on the one side. All right, let's just break it down to youth group in the middle. All right, let's just gather the rest of the people on the other side. So you listen to me over here, and they're all my the followers and the disciples. You break it up into different sections, and you teach these people. That's not what Jesus did. Jesus really didn't care whether they're kids or the old or the woman or the man, the pagan. He did not care. Everyone, sit down. Listen. That's the teachings of Jesus. Jesus never broke up into pieces and in different groups. He always spoke directly to the people, regardless of their age, regardless of their genders, regardless of who they are. That's the teachings of the Bible. That's how Jesus did. That's how the Bible taught us to do. But how come we're not following? Because we think that's right. Because what we think is right. So, our idea is above God's command. You see, remember I told you when we were actually, sharing the story of the Genesis, when the serpent came to the woman, it said, if you eat of this fruit, you be like God, knowing good and evil. So I asked you a question. Knowing good and evil is a bad thing? Is that a bad thing or is it a good thing? Knowing good and evil. Just to answer me. Knowing good and evil, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? It's a good thing. Anyone else? Don't overthink. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? You go with good. Okay, it's very simple. Think about this. Serpent told the woman, if you eat this fruit, you will be like God, knowing good and evil. If the serpent is asking you, and if the serpent is telling woman, if you eat this fruit, you will know good and evil. So, is the serpent wanted to give something good to the woman? Yeah, you have to think. Serpent did not want to give something good to woman, nor the Adam. The purpose of the serpent is to destroy the woman and Adam. He wanted to give you something bad, not something good. God always wants to give you something good, but the evil one, the serpent, always wants to give us something to destroy us. Right? From that perspective, going back to the question again, is knowing good and evil a good thing? No, it's bad. Then you're scratching your head like, wait a second. That don't make any sense to me. Knowing good and evil is supposed to be good. Right? Knowing good and you have to know what's good and evil in order for you, to prevent not to do anything bad. If you don't know the difference between good and bad, then obviously you will do something stupid. Okay, that's correct. So before that, right? Before this is, woman and Adam eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge, right? For them, the basis of the determine what's good and bad is nothing to do with them. What God told them to do is a good thing. What God told them not to do is a bad thing. It's nothing to do with my perspective. It's what God told. To do is a good, not to do is bad. The basis of determining good and evil was what God said. But what serpent wanted to give us, and a woman and an Adam, and the descendants of all the woman and Adam, is this. You know what? Forget what God said. What you think is right is good. What you think is wrong it's bad. So, the basis is now starting from our perspective. It's not what God said, it's what I think. So then the question is, everyone has a different basis. Everyone is different. What they think is right versus what they think is wrong is just there's no absolute value. It's a variable. You keep changing from person to person. He's changing from generations to generations. What is right and what is wrong is keep changing based on countries, time, race, ages. It's all different. Everyone's got their own standard. Everyone's got their own basis to say what's good and what's bad. So now, what happened? Because everybody has their own view of what's good and evil, what happened? We started to have conflict. What I call it right, what I call it is good, why do you call me bad? We started to have a conflict now. So, because of the conflict, what happened? We start to fight, right? So all this chaos started to come in. Because we always put on emphasis what I think is right versus what I think is wrong. This is where all the chaos has started. So what I think is right, I call it right and good. Right? But you may say, like, I don't agree with you. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's good. I think it's bad. Right? So then, now we have a problem because we don't agree. But if all of us follow what God said is good and what God told us not to do is bad, then will we have a conflict? No, there is no conflict. Because we all agree that what God said is good and what God said not to do is bad. Over time, thousands of years, what God said always been right. And what God said not to do was always wrong. The basis is different. What we think is right is not absolute. Right? It's always moving around. It's like a moving target. Whereas what God said is right and what God said not to do is never changed. Thousands of years ago and until now, never changed. It's always been the same. So if we follow what God said, then we would not have a problem. We would not have chaos. But because we kept emphasizing what we think is right and what we think is good and what we think is bad, because we put so much emphasis and so much of, we kind of we try to convince other people what I think is right. This is where all the conflict and there's always trouble comes. So, what Bible has kept telling us and teaching us, don't do what you think is right. Just do what God said. Then you will always know. Alright. Verse 16. So Joshua took all that land, the hill country, and all the Negeb, and all the land of Goshen, and the lowland, and Arba, and the hill country of Israel, and its lowland, from Mount Halak, which rise towards Asir, as far as the Baal God, and in the village of Lebanon, below Mount Hermon. And he captured all their kings, and struck them, and put them to death. Joshua made a war a long time with all those kings. There was not a city that made peace with the people of Israel, except the Hivites, the inhabitants of the Gibeons. They took them all the battle, for it was the Lord's doing to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, in order that they should be devoted to destructions, and should receive no mercy, but be destroyed, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. And Joshua came at that time and cut off Anakim from the hill country, from Hebron, from Debir, and Anap, and from all hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua devoted them to destructions with their cities. There was none of the Anakim left in the land of people of Israel. Only in Gaza, in Geth, and Ashdod did some remain. So Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had spoken to Moses, and Joshua gave it all for all the inheritance to Israel according to their tribal allotment, and the land had rest from war. So, as you can see here, except the Gibeonites, there was no other tribe survived, because God decided to destroy them. And God actually did what? When you look at the verse 20, what did he say? Lord, harden their heart. So they fought against Israel, and God gave them into Joshua's hand to destroy them. No one had survived except Gibeonites. And Joshua did exactly what God told Moses to do and what Moses told Joshua to do. And in our life, this is the lessons that we learn. It's not about what we think. Let's understand we must know the Word. Knowing Word is equal to knowing Jesus. If you know Jesus, then you have to know that what He's doing is always good for you. Let me tell you this. Ever since I came to this place, right, it seems like I brought the coronavirus here. As soon as I enter into this land, the coronavirus just, broke off, and then everybody has to wear a mask. As soon as I came here, there are a lot of things went wrong. Because number one, they just recently changed the systems that I actually need to get the resident card here. The resident card is, I can't get this resident card because they recently changed the systems that they now will take double of the time to get my resident card. I'm stuck here. I can't do anything. I can't buy anything unless I have a cash. And then I'm looking for a house, and just before I came to this place, the law has changed. So every house is, the people who owns 2 houses in Seoul, they actually, they'll be getting, the tax implications. So a lot of the people who were actually, put in the markets for rent, they pulled it away. So there's no houses around here. I can't get my house. A lot of things went wrong. Then I can say Lord, what are you doing? I'm here. And it's just right before I came to this place and you started all this. Why are you doing this to me? I can complain. But you know what? Because what I said to you, I trust the Lord is doing what is best for me. I don't know what the best is, but I do have a faith that God is doing what is best for me. I never lose that faith. How did I get that faith? Because what I see in the Bible. His promise, His covenant never changed. He's always been faithful. He's always trying to give what is best for us. And it's not just something I'm telling you to do so, because I have that faith. And God never failed me. The God who never failed me, He will never fail you. So I want you to just trust the Lord. I want you to give a full faith to Him. And sometimes you will not have that faith. That's okay. That's okay. But be honest with the Lord. When you can't trust Him, pray to the Lord and say, Lord, I don't have that kind of faith. I just don't. So I'm asking you, Lord, to grant me the faith that I need to trust you. Be honest. You don't have to just to fake yourself. Just be honest. Because He knows your heart. Just tell Him that you don't have that faith. Just pray to Him. Be honest. Lord, my faith is so weak, and you know me. But I want to trust you. But since I don't have that kind of faith, please allow me to have that faith. Because I want to be truthful, faithful to you. Then He will grant you those faith. Whoever comes to Him in inquiring His help, He will never forget you. He will never forsake you. just to be yourself and truthful to Him, and He will always be truthful to you. Okay, so up to this point, so we're going to just finish this up to chapter 11. Any questions about the things that we covered today? So the things that we covered today, is that kind of like, kind of goes pretty similar to what you guys discussed?